All right, greeting and welcome to today's webinar, PKI, the Security Swiss Army Knife. On today's webinar, we are going to share with you a number of use cases for PKI, how you can save time and money with a hosted CA, and ways you can integrate GlobalSign's hosted CA with your Active Directory infrastructure to seamlessly deploy certificates internally and externally. Presenting today will be Kim Johnson, Product Manager at GlobalSign, and Sid Desai, GlobalSign's Vice President of Sales Engineering. We welcome your interactions with us while the phones are on mute. We do encourage questions, and if you have questions throughout the presentation, you can submit them using the question box in the GoToWebinar tool panel or control panel. We'll keep track and try to answer them at the end of today's webinar. We will also be recording today's presentation, and we'll send you a link to the recorded webinar in a follow-up email to you. So before I hand it off to Kim to get things started, I just want to run down our agenda. We will first discuss a few challenges and how PKI addresses them. We'll then talk about some deployment options, which include why you should consider a hosted CA and the benefits you can achieve. From there, we'll go into some of the technical examples of GlobalSign and how you can leverage Active Directory to help you deploy certificates where you need to. All right, Kim.
Great. So as Christian mentioned, we're going to take a look at some of the challenges that you may be facing and how PKI can really come to your rescue. I'm going to be explaining the challenges, but then leave it up to Sid as a GlobalSign sales engineer to explain the PKI side, being that he really has dealt with this in the wild, so to speak, with existing customers. So the first challenge is all about letting the right users and machines in, and of course, keeping the wrong ones out, something which is not easily done. Particularly because how do you know which users and machines to trust? For years, the go-to method for controlling user access has of course been passwords, but the problem is that they place a great deal of responsibility in the hands of the user. Chosen passwords must be sufficiently complex so as not to be easily guessed, but then they also need to be simple enough to be committed to memory and not stored in any physical locations. With an average of about 8.5 passwords to remember for work-related accounts alone, it's not really surprising that users are often resorting to reusing passwords or, as we know, writing them down on Post-it notes on their monitor. So in fact, 50% of the users use the same passwords for personal and work-related accounts, and about 21% write their passwords down. Okay, so in addition to user authentication, there's also a growing need to identify and control which machines, for example, desktops, laptops, servers, can access and operate on your network. Rogue machines are both inside and an outside threat. And employee demand is starting to rise for personal devices and being able to use personal devices. And this has really grown to a point that 74% of organizations are using or plan to adopt Bring Your Own Device, or BYOD. These unregulated devices can bring malware into your corporate network. Your IT admins have no control over security policies. And if not restricted, there's always malicious third parties looking for an easy access point. So Sid, how does PKI come to the rescue to help us identify which of those users and machines really should be trusted?
Well, Kim, certificates are a great option for both user and machine authentication. With the use of digital certificates, only users and machines or devices with properly configured certificates will be able to access and operate on your networks. Now, note that there's always a trade-off between increasing security and the costs involved and the burden on end users. Most people don't think of it, but using certificates is very easy for end users. After the certificate is installed, and in some cases this can happen automatically, there's nothing further to be done on the user's end. Most enterprise solutions already support certificate-based authentication anyway. Most PKI solutions today come with a cloud-based management platform that makes it easy for administrators to issue certificates to new employees, renew their certificates, and revoke certificates when an employee leaves the organization. Solutions that do integrate with Active Directory can make the enrollment and the issuance processes even easier by enabling auto-enrollment and silent installations. In fact, one of the biggest advantages of using certificates is that, like some solutions that only work for users, unlike biometrics and one-time passwords, the same solution using certificates can be used for all endpoints. That is, users, machines, devices, and even the growing Internet of Things. You can also easily leverage existing group policies and permissions to take control of which users and machines can access different applications and networks. Adding certificates on top of these existing policies and permission management tools is like adding icing on top of a cake, to be honest. The good thing is that using certificates is all about mutual authentication, meaning both parties involved in a communication are identifying themselves, whether that communication is from a user to a user, or a user to a machine, or a machine to a machine, in fact. Certificates are also easy to roll out to users outside of your organization. For example, independent contractors, freelancers who may need access to your networks. They won't need additional software on their local machine, and the ease of use means that you don't really need to provide them additional training. I hope that helps answer your question, Kim. Back over to you.
Great, Sid. Definitely answered the question, and good to see PKI to the rescue. And we're going to look at the next challenge also. And so one of the more common security concerns is, of course, with email and looking at email security. So some of the risks associated with using emails, right? Email is an essential part of our everyday life, or has become, and there's over 100 billion business emails sent and received every single day. So these 100 billion emails often include sensitive and also confidential data, leaving it vulnerable to falling into the wrong hands. So in fact, a recent survey found that 53% of employees reported receiving unencrypted, risky corporate data via emails or even email attachments. And I definitely want to highlight that the risk of data loss shouldn't be the only concern for industries such as healthcare and finance that handle sensitive information, but rather it should be on everybody's mind. We can't forget last year's Sony hack, right? Those emails containing studio employee opinions on actors and upcoming releases have had a lasting effect on their reputation. And in addition to data loss, spear phishing attacks are also on the rise. Often with spear phishing, the attacker will impersonate an individual or department from your organization. For example, you may receive an email that appears to be from your IT department saying you need to re-enter your credentials on a certain site, or one from HR with a new benefits package attached. It can be very difficult to identify these types of messages. And some studies have even found as many as 94% of employees can't tell the difference between real and phishing emails. Because of this, as many as 11% of people click on the attachments in these emails, which usually contain malware. So, Sid, once again, how is PKI going to help with our email security challenge?
Thanks, Kim. So before we really talk about email security, let's first of all talk about what is SMIME. SMIME is the industry standard for public key encryption for MIME-based data. Now, without a detour and turning this into a webinar on SMIME, here's a high-level overview on what SMIME is and how it mitigates the risk of data loss and phishing. So at the root of it, SMIME offers two security functions. When you digitally sign an email or a piece of document, a cryptographic operation binds the public key from your certificates and the contents of that email into one unique fingerprint. Now, because the digital signature contains your unique public key, the recipients know it was actually you who signed it. You can see how this can seriously help mitigate the risk of phishing attacks you talked about earlier. If your company standardizes on digitally signing all emails, a phishing email sent by an imposter wouldn't really have a valid digital signature, which would send up red flags to your employees not to trust it. On the other side, encrypting an email is like sealing your message in a lockbox, and only the intended recipient has the key. Anyone else who intercepts the message, either in transit or where it's stored on the server, will not be able to view the contents, helping to prevent the data loss you talked about earlier. One of the benefits of using SMIME is that most email clients already support it. Applications such as Microsoft Outlook, Thunderbird, Apple Mail, Mulberry Mail, to name a few. These clients are out-of-box SMIME compliant, whether you're using a desktop or a mobile device. This functionality means emails can be signed and encrypted at the click of a button, so it's incredibly quick and cost-effective. I hope that helps. Back to you, Kim.
Great, thanks, Sid. Yeah, it definitely helps, obviously, looking at the email security piece, knowing that really it should be a best practice to digitally sign those emails. And so looking at the next challenge, and the final challenge we're going to take a look at today, is really around the concept of a high volume deployment. So high volume deployment concerns, right? Basically, we're looking at whether you choose a PKI-based solution or not, rolling out a solution to a larger organization is going to raise some common concerns. And these really include some key questions, such as how are you going to enroll new users when they are hired, or remove older users when they leave the company? Also, how are you going to implement your access control policy? How is the solution rolled out to machines? Will you need to locate and install on each machine? And also, does the solution require additional software on each user machine? So, Sid, you've been part of some really high volume deployments of PKI. How have you seen it address these types of questions?
Well, to answer that question, Kim, I almost always ask the organizations to look at their existing investments. I often start by asking them questions like, how can you easily deploy a solution to thousands of users and machines? How can you keep track of when users and machines are added or removed? Well, I would like to point out that you already have a repository of all these endpoints, Active Directory. How are you going to control who can access which resources? Well, you have group policies. Perhaps you're stressed at the idea of having another end-user application to support. Well, you don't really need to worry about that. Your clients, in this case, already support the entire certificate lifecycle management on Windows. So you don't really need to have any additional software. And by leveraging Active Directory and Microsoft Certificate Services means you certificates to all domain-connected objects based on group policies. Auto-enrollment and silent installation makes the entire process for deployment easy for IT administrators and end users alike. I hope that helps, Kim. Back to you.
Great, Sid. Definitely. And Active Directory is obviously a key part in this and high volume deployments. And also, so along with these use cases that we just went over, there are some other ones that we obviously wanted to highlight along in this list. So these are some which we are seeing commonly being addressed. So we had the SMIME, digitally signing encrypting emails. Another one is key archival and key recovery. Smart card logon, user authentication, which we mentioned, machine authentication also mentioned, but then also domain controller authentication. And then digitally signing for Microsoft Office documents, SSL, of course, and then finally encrypted file system or EFS. Okay, so it's clear that PKI can meet some of the challenges you may be facing in terms of security threats and high volume deployments. Now, let's take a look at what would be involved if you were to actually deploy a high volume PKI solution. So, as we discussed on leveraging Active Directory, it can really significantly help with provisioning and managing those certificates. But how do you get the certificates in the first place? Well, you have two main options, as you can see here. You can either run your own in-house CA, and this is often using Microsoft Certificate Services, or you can partner with a third-party CA, such as GlobalSign. And for a long time, the only way to integrate a CA with Active Directory was to run your own Microsoft CA and manage the CA operations yourself. This, of course, is going to involve understanding technical concepts such as key management, revocation, use of HSMs, and etc., and having the right personnel to also run and manage your PKI system. Well, times have really changed. However, and now a few third-party CAs offer their own Active Directory integrations. And this means that you can get all of those automation benefits we talked about earlier, but without having to run your own CA in-house. So Sid is going to go over what running your own CA entails on the next slide. But the debate is really similar for any in-house versus hosted solution. Think of file storage, right? Sure, you can create your own application for storing and sharing files, or you could also use one that's designed and managed by experts such as Dropbox, for example. So Sid, you want to go into that a little bit further?
Yeah, thank you, Kim, for that example. So the example that you gave me kind of reminds me of Dropbox and any other cloud-based storage provider, to be honest. It's so much easier to run and maintain a cloud storage product today versus trying to reinvent the wheel yourselves and creating SANs and storage networks. Just like that storage example, deploying and managing your own in-house CA can be complicated. Not only does one need specialized skills, but to do so securely also requires expensive hardware that you talked about, such as HSMs, and specialized knowledge on segmenting operational practices from other operational infrastructure. If you ask any IT administrator today on their existing in-house PKI processes, you'll probably get some very scary answers. Okay, so if you move on to the next slide, you must be thinking, running your own CA can be quite complicated. I get it. But how can outsourcing my CA and PKI needs help me? Well, I want you to think about for a second here about your existing IT administration and help desk processes. Outsourcing your PKI liberates these IT folks from worrying about how to manage something that they're really not sure of. Since most of the PKI and CA operations are automated or offloaded, IT can then start focusing on their core competencies. Your risk management teams and IT auditing teams will thank you for reducing the risks associated with managing and maintaining an in-house PKI operations, storing of vulnerable root keys, etc. And since you are leveraging a PKI system that's delivered by a Web Trust compliant CA, you know that all of our processes will be at par with the industry standards and the latest certificate practices and policies. Outsourcing your PKI operations will also help reduce costs. Kim, do you want to go over those details in the next slide?
Absolutely. So, as Sid mentioned, understand that running your own in-house CA is complicated, but as we mentioned, it's also important to understand that it's expensive as well. And since Microsoft CA services are included with Windows Enterprise Server, a common misconception is that running your own CA is more cost-effective than using a hosted solution. So while that's true that running your own CA means you won't have to pay for the certificate to issue, there are significant other costs involved. So for example, looking at the chart here, the first is the hardware costs. And so running your own in-house CA will require more infrastructure that you'll need than you will need for a cloud-based solution, or wouldn't be required. And this is things such as a HSM, possibly 2 of them for high availability. You have dedicated server as well. And then we're looking at the full-time employee costs. So what it's going to be to actually run your own CA. And it's estimated to be around about $80,000 per year. And then finally, that brings us to that 5-year total cost of ownership. And as you can see, although you aren't paying for certificates, the overhead and management of that Microsoft CA can actually end up being quite a bit higher than initially expected. Now, that is not to mention also other potential costs, and we see customers come up against these quite often. For example, needing trusted root for public trust, wanting those SMIME certificates for external communications is something that we see quite often. And then we're also looking at compliance audits and a secure facility to actually manage and store that root CA. So opting for a hosted solution would significantly decrease, if not eliminate entirely, many of those management costs by cutting your TCO by as much as 50% compared to an internal CA. So there are some additional benefits to using a hosted CA that you also might want to consider. Using a third-party CA gives that option to issue publicly trusted certificates, as I mentioned. And that's where that SMIME use case comes up. You want to secure external email as well as internal. And then you can also issue privately trusted certificates. And this is ideal for the authentication scenario we talked about within the corporate network. Hosted CAs generally offer additional administration functionality, as well as more robust user interfaces, management platforms, and that all makes it easier to report on and log certificate and user activity. And then finally, many hosted CAs offer self-service options that also make it easier to manage external users, those that don't reside within your corporate domain. All right, so enough talk about what it could look like. I'm going to turn it over to Sid to go over what it actually looks like. and have him explain our Global Sign Auto-Enrollment Gateway, or AEG. Over to you, Sid.
Thank you, Kim. So Global Sign's Auto-Enrollment Gateway, or AEG, is essentially a piece of software service that acts as a connector between the Global Sign Software as a Service certificate services and an organization's Windows environment. Let's take a look at how this really works in our next slide. So if you look at the next slide, it says that every typical installation where we deploy AEG has 4 key components that work together to ensure that the right digital certificates are provisioned to the right endpoints. So first off, you have the AEG software itself that runs on a domain-joined Windows server. Next, you have the Active Directory servers, or domain controllers, that allow admins to manage and store information about the resources in that domain. You then have your endpoints. These are your users, devices, servers, workstations, pretty much any entity that is a consumer of digital certificates. And finally, the 4th component is the Global Sign Certificate Center, or GCC, that sits on top of our robust certificate issuance and management engine. This component is the one that manufactures the certificates that your endpoints use. All of these 4 components are important. One cannot operate without the presence of another. So 3 of these 4 components that are shown here reside on-premise at the customer site, and the 4th one, the GCC, is on our cloud. So now that we've had a clear understanding of the components involved, let's see how it all kind of works together. So at first, the endpoints are pre-configured with the group policy. The group policy guides these endpoints, and these can be workstations requesting for a client authentication certificate, a user requesting for an S/MIME certificate, to really connect to the AEG server to pull the certificate enrollment policies. Now this happens over HTTPS. The AEG server then sends a request to Active Directory via LDAP to get a list of certificate templates these endpoints can enroll for. And in step number 4, sends that list over to the endpoints along with the location of the CA where these endpoints can grab these certificates from. Now that the endpoints have the policies in hand, they connect to the AEG server again, but this time they connect to request the actual certificates. The AEG, in turn, impersonates these incoming requests from these endpoints and generates an API call wrapped within a CSR with all the set requests and sends it to our Global Sign Certificate Center, or GCC, for processing. Finally, in steps number 7 and 8, the GCC backend processes the requests, usually within seconds, and sends an API response back along with the certificate to be installed on the endpoints as requested. So the entire process takes place over a few seconds and can be fully automated by setting up the endpoints to automatically grab the certificates using group policies. So if you move on to our next slide, AEG can also accommodate basically every architecture one has. So from a single forest, single domain, to a multi-domain and multi-forest, as long as there is trust between these 2 forests and domains. You only need one instance of AEG, which is hosted right at the original root domain. We don't see it very often, but if you happen to have a solution where you do not have a cross-trust between your forests, this just means that you would need another instance of AEG. So looking at some of the unique features that AEG offers, first off, we've got the MDM connector. So for most organizations who are using different types of mobile devices and tablets, certificates and mobile devices issued via an MDM system, which is a mobile device management system, can be used for use cases such as email encryption and signing, email authentication, VPN, or even Wi-Fi authentication. Connecting your MDM platform to the same APIs that AEG talks to centralizes your certificate activity across all devices. Second, AEG has been developed by an ex-Microsoft crypto team. So you know you're getting something that's already proven. Third, AG is a clientless solution. And what this means is that there's a lot of vendors and CAs out there that offer similar AD integration options, but they all require a client to be installed on all endpoints. AG does not. And lastly, AG makes your implementation and certificate lifecycle processes very streamlined by offloading the heavy-duty work to us while you enjoy your certificates. So finally, to put a wrapper around all of the topics that we talked about today, you may ask yourselves, is PKI really the only IT Swiss Army knife you ever need? Well, it certainly is one of the tools you should have in your IT security tool chest. The truth is, certificates and PKI systems have been around for a while. They are definitely a proven technology that can be used not only to secure your public-facing websites and web portals, but also to facilitate the security of your corporate networks and intranets. A PKI system of today should really be able to do more than just mitigating the risk of data loss and unauthorized access. Customers and enterprises today expect their PKI systems to be scalable, to be easy to deploy, and perhaps even automate some of their existing business processes. Most companies today use and are very heavily dependent on Active Directory as their user and device provisioning system, and it only makes sense that we leverage these existing investments, databases, and policies to give your users a PKI system that's robust and can meet all their needs. So back to you, Christian.
Thanks, Sid. Thanks, Kim and Sid, for a great presentation today. We will be taking your questions in a minute. Want to make sure that you have time to ask some questions before we wrap up today. In order to engage with us for more information about what we've talked about today, we encourage you to not only visit our website but engage with us on Twitter and LinkedIn. And we will be sending a follow-up email to you with a recorded presentation that you have that can share and view on your own time. So with that, we'll start with questions. Sid, our first question here is: will GlobalSign create a custom CA for us, or is that something we need to do ourselves?
So yes, GlobalSign can definitely go through the process of creating your own custom CA. We kind of work toward what we call the process. It's the key signing ceremony. So this is a process where we create a public-private key combination for you, and we host it on our infrastructure. The generation of these root keys, the private keys and the public key combination, require key holders, witnesses, and legal representatives from GlobalSign to be physically present in one location. And the private keys are stored in a very highly secure infrastructure, sometimes, well, a lot of times using HSMs, and these are usually behind firewalls and physical level separation. Now, mind you that these private keys that you use for your endpoints or your users and machines, they never leave your system. We have no insight into these private keys. It's only the root keys that we use to create a custom CA to sign these certificates that are issued to these endpoints are the ones that we manage. I hope that answers your question.
Great, thanks, Sid. Our next question here, I work with smaller businesses and like to champion SMIME and PKI. Would this be ideal if costs were on the smaller scale, under 100 users?
Yeah, so we definitely have a lot of people, small to medium-sized businesses using our solutions. The benefit of a PKI system like this is you can definitely scale from a small number of users to all the way hundreds of thousands of users. So in fact, when you have a smaller scale deployment, the deployment timelines are in fact a lot quicker. In fact, sometimes we've had customers go through the entire process of deployment in under a day with that number of users. So yes, it's definitely possible.
Okay, thanks. We got a follow-up question from the same person who just asked the previous question. Do you support a fixed set of certificate templates, or will it support any certificate template that you can create in a Windows CA?
So the good thing is we support what's currently supported in a Windows CA. So 90% of the use cases that we have to offer today, we kind of piggyback off of these Windows templates. The good thing about being a CA is, Christian, that we can create custom OIDs and custom key usages as well. So if a company or a customer has any specific needs where they want to create their own custom template with a custom key usage, they can definitely come and talk to us, and we can work with them to make sure we have that added. So yes, to answer that question, we do support the existing Windows CA templates.
Okay, perfect. You got to thank you for that answer too. Sid, our next question is, does your solution handle deployment of certificates to Apple devices, example Mac, iPads, etc.?
So the Autoenrolment Gateway solution that we have currently only works on Windows devices because it's based on top of the existing Windows auto-enrollment protocols. But the benefit of having AEG that eventually ends up connecting to our managed PKI solution is that you can still use our managed PKI backend, the piece that manufactures these certificates, to provision certs on non-Windows devices such as Apple and OS X devices. So there is a process involved, but it's not as automated as the Windows devices are.
Okay, thank you, Sid. We have one last question, and before we address that one, just want to make sure that there's time to get in any last-minute questions that you do have. If you do have additional questions, please get them in right now. Sid, our last question here is: how do you manage both internal and external certificates?
So, Christian, what we have is our managed PKI portal. And our managed PKI portal, or the Global Sign Certificate Center, as we call it, what we have is the idea of profiles. And what we do is we can split your account into multiple profiles, and one of the profile can issue and provision certificates for your public-facing websites. And if you want that process to be manual, it can be completely isolated from AEG. But then you can still use that same account and have a different profile that can issue certificates to your internal Active Directory domains and devices. So yes, the same account can be used to issue both internal and external certificates. So the entire life cycle for these certificates can be managed via a single portal.
All right, so we got one last question that just came in. Once again, if you do have additional questions, please ask them now. This question is, what happens if we lose internet connection to Global Sign for 24 hours?
So it really depends on if your certificate provisioning systems are in place and if something is wrong locally within your network, our backend systems have redundancy in place. So if you can't request and process certificates from one of our endpoints, you will definitely be able to request and process certificates through another endpoint. So and before, there's very rarely that our backend kind of just goes down randomly. And before we make any updates to our backend or software patches and so on, we definitely send out an email to our customers letting them know that we are going to be updating our systems and won't be able to process certificates as you want them. So we do have a defined process in place to take care of that redundancy.
All right, great, thank you, Sid. So it looks like that was our last question today. Once again, we want to thank everyone for attending. We will be sending out once again a follow-up email with the recorded presentation, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from our sales staff on ways we can help you down the road. So once again, thank you, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Kristen.